Okay, thank you. Welcome, David. Thanks, Alan. Oh, why did she leave? And Graham, if we could make a start, that would be appreciated.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Now we've got a presentation. Right, morning councillors. This item follows a workshop we had about a month ago, and really is suggesting a way forward, a process for seeking better outcomes for the network of housing for the elderly villages. Looking at both the management of the villages and an ongoing approach to redevelopment. Yep. So the intention today is to update you on latest government initiatives with social housing, looking at some of the key opportunities we see in the portfolio, and seeking your formal approval to some objectives to guide a process to select really, I guess, a consortium probably of partners from the not-for-profit sector to proceed with this initiative. Go next to where we want to end up in terms of recommendations. Yeah. I'm not as fit as I was. Critically, we're seeking approval for the objectives for the partnership approach, and as I said at the workshop, and I'll comment on a bit more in a minute, this is probably the most important part of the session, and that's getting an authority there to go and put together a what we envisage as some sort of consortium that we can work with from the not-for-profit sector, and from that process really inform a significant set of recommendations which would come back here prior to the end of the year. Now, just for some context, and we did a lot of this at the workshop, so I won't sort of trawl over it too much, but really this approach was flagged as part of the strategic framework, if you like, following from the Auckland Plan and the Strategic Action Plan on Housing. And you can see there that the key elements of enabling redevelopment on our current sites was flagged, using our asset and the need to help grow the whole community housing sector. And part of our own statement of intent, of course, is to be promoting exemplar housing developments and increasing supply, particularly in the affordable sector. Now, everything has a context, and as well as our own strategic context, there's been a major initiative building from the government to revamp over time its approach to the provision of social housing. And that strategic initiative is very much around the government revamping the funding model to open up the supply and management of social housing much more broadly than just Housing New Zealand, and to, over time, in a model that's very common overseas, have a significant amount of social housing provided by the third sector, as well as obviously still an ongoing significant government agency involvement. So the key parts of that are shifting government subsidy assistance to being something administered by the Ministry of Social Development, who have the ability to look at tenants, look at social housing provider options, and decide what the what sort of options it's prepared to fund. So it broadens all that out. and obviously Auckland has been identified as a significant area where the government is not currently meeting social housing needs. Key thing about the subsidies I just referred to is that a clear part of the government's strategic approach is that because it wants to grow the third sector, the entities that can be in receipt of these subsidies need to be at arm's length from a council. Now, just exactly what that means at the end of the day is not entirely clear, but it certainly means that the council needs to be prepared to give away a lot of the sort of control and maybe full ownership, well, that's not entirely clear. But clearly it can't just continue to be a sort of a council-run enterprise if we want to access that subsidy regime. What you see on the other hand is that over time that subsidy regime moving obligations off ratepayers and over to taxpayers is a significant source of revenue which will enable us to get much better outcomes from our sites if we can trigger the capacity to get those subsidies. Now, you've had all these facts before, so I won't go over them. Obviously, there's just the numbers, and key thing probably to note there is that in terms of that bunch of own your own housing, we're sort of putting that to one side at the moment because that is quite a complicated policy issue on its own, and we don't want to hold up the main game, as it were, but we will have to return to just how we get best outcomes for that portion of the portfolio in due course. What we should be clear about is that this network of sites is really a huge strategic opportunity for us. Essentially, it represents a significant block, even though it's not all together, 60-odd hectares, 26 hectares of land. Much of it is in very good locations and much of it is capable of having a lot more housing on it. So when you think about our land holdings and what's suitable for residential, this is a significant opportunity for us to make a real difference to both social and affordable housing. There's a lot that's going to be possible from a redevelopment program, as well as the opportunity, as I said before, to access a whole new stream of revenue, which will be the government subsidy regime. Now, as I noted at the workshop when we sort of went over this, the draft objectives are actually the most important part of this discussion today, because in reality this is an evolving piece of policy. No one knows, all the answers at the moment in terms of where the management evolves in terms of different models and potential for improvement, the redevelopment model and how we get the best use from the sites, how we come up with a funding model that enables us to replicate at least the number of housing units that we have social housing units we have at the moment, if not more, how we get a tranche of affordable housing onto a lot of those sites if they're suitable. All that has to be thought through. So we can't pretend that we can sit here today and know exactly how this will play out. Even in fact the exact nature of the partnership consortium that we will end up with these not-for-profit providers. So in a context like that, what's actually most important is that you are clear what you sort of want from it all, because as long as we know what objectives we're trying to achieve, we can kind of operate within a bit of a framework of certainty because we know what we've got to get at the end, and then we can think about different ways with other partners of how we get there. And I think, judging from the workshop, there was a general level of comfort that this list of draft objectives kind of capture most of the discussion that's taken place at earlier workshops and from existing policy positions the council has. So it's, we want to keep at least the level of current social housing. We need to look after the tenants we have at the moment and any transitional arrangements. We want to grow the capability of the not-for-profit community sector. We want to access non-ratepayer revenue through the subsidy regime, potentially philanthropic organisations giving, maybe putting in capital. We want to make sure that we get the best yield we can from the sites that we own. We showed you examples at the workshop of some sites where it's possible to treble, or even in some of them like quadruple, you know, the number of housing units. And the one we did as a pilot a couple of years, or 18 odd months ago, which was Wilshire Village, what that demonstrated is you can, that literally sort of quadrupled the yield on that site. Now, they're not all like that, and we don't know enough at this point about how much we can increase the overall yield, but we do know it will be material. So getting the most out of that is obviously a key objective, because essentially the council has put all that property asset into housing. Obviously we're all failing in our job if we don't get the maximum number of houses we can on those sites consistent with good urban design principles. Other objectives we've got there are clearly there's going to be a very slow, measured and phased approach to implementing anything. We obviously have a whole lot of sensitivities to manage, a number of complex issues, so this is not going to go at breakneck speed. Another important objective which we want to get on the table from the start explicitly, and we kind of reinforce this after the workshop, is this is not going to be one of those property assets where we're trying to get value out in some sort of dividend way, you know, something back. What we're saying here is that all the value that can be released from the stream of subsidies, from redevelopment, from sale of bits of some of the sites, it's all going to be reinvested back into the portfolio. So it's kind of like a closed circle, as it were, and the objective will be to recycle funding through to keep reinvesting back and getting the most we can out of it, rather than taking money out as we do with normal property sales and putting it into something else. So those objectives that I had up there are, as I say, really the essence of this session, because once we are all clear what we're trying to achieve, it'll be a very powerful tool for this innovative sort of approach as we move forward. And critically, it enables us to have to provide a level of certainty and engage in good quality discussions with the other potential partners that we'll be working with, because they know that we mean business, they know we want an outcome, and they know what we're trying to achieve. So the proposed process, what we're asking you to approve today is kicking off basically a way of going out and getting together some groupings of not-for-profit providers. Alan and I have already had a number of discussions with various ones in that sector, so we're clear this is a real possibility and there's definite interest. Obviously it's a fairly sort of immature sector at the moment, as they'd be the first to acknowledge, but there's a lot of potential and willingness, and they've been steadily building their capacity. So we would envisage coming back to you after putting together a draft partnership, call it that, consortium, whatever we end up calling it. We'll have done some preliminary work with them on next steps, and we will be coming back to the committee to get that whole package ticked off. So nothing is going to happen in terms of commitments without bringing it all back in sufficient shape. You can see clearly what it will look like and what it will do. And then the next stage will be, once that consortium has been formed, to then think about a whole approach to redevelopment of the sites, and that will again involve us coming back perhaps repeatedly to this committee over time as we kind of flesh that out and want to move to action mode. That just gives you some thoughts on the structure potentially. We're keeping it fairly flexible at the moment, and a lot of this actually is based on feedback we've had from the third sector about what would work for them.